quite often I'll come in and that issue of sibling rivalry is the elephant in the room that the family are really grappling with, and I sort of get stuck into sort of trying to sort it out.
This week I sat down with Martin Tobin from Kin in the Game, who brings a different perspective to this podcast. The interesting thing about Martin is that he straddles two worlds, first having successfully run his own family business, and now on the flip side, he helps business owners navigate their own family businesses. We talk about the unique challenges that family businesses bring, such as blurred relationships, sibling rivalry, succession planning, and ultimately, how to make it work. It can sometimes be tough, but often can be so worthwhile. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Happy listening. So thanks for joining us, Martin. Appreciate you coming on. I'm quite excited to have you on. Obviously, a lot of the time we have our guests on, they're business owners. That in this case, you're a business owner, but you're also looking after business owners, which is very interesting. So just wanted to start with, as a starting point, just to tell us a little bit about your family, Moira and the kids, and your family business background, if we can start like that.
Sure. Good to be with you, Joe. So I'm married with 4 kids, and my wife Moira, and she holds the fort at home and looks after all of us. And she's got her own business where she sells Thermomix, which is the kitchen whiz device that is incredibly popular around the place. And she does extremely well with that, with her sales and support of her cooking community. And so that keeps her pretty busy as well. She also helps with my admin and invoicing and booking flights and all that sort of stuff. So she's very much part of my business. And the kids are all young adults growing up, and 2 of them are in the workforce already, and 2 are still through university and those sort of early years of adulthood. So so that we've got our hands full. Our second son's just moving out at the moment, so that's nice. A bit more sort of less noise and less, a bit more space around the house at home. A bit more food in the cupboard.
A bit less disruption. Yeah.
So, but so they're all growing up fast, and and it's been an interesting journey, sort of with the 6 of us in the house for so long. But which is an opportunity perhaps for me to start working a bit more from home, because I do have an office that I escape to when I can. Just to get that sort of distraction-free time. But, maybe I'll sneak back to home over the next 12 months, which everyone seems to be doing. So my background is my family business is Tobin Brothers, the funeral company. So my grandfather and his 3 brothers established the business in the 1930s, and my dad eventually moved into the business as a second-generation owner and leader, along with 3 of his first cousins. So one son from each of the founding brothers came into the business in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and they were all different ages and different sort of, different walks of life, because they were first cousins. None of them were siblings. And that was the second generation structure. And then I came along, some years later as the third generation leader. And I was essentially working in collaboration with 7 or 8 of my third cousins. So they were the children of my dad's cousins. So we were like quite a complex structure. And this notion of the cousin consortium, where you're expected to sort of have the same values and work ethic and education and sort of sense of direction as people that you haven't had a lot of contact with in your personal life, because we lived in different parts of Melbourne and went to different schools, and we shared the history of the business, but we didn't have a lot of sort of broader things in common. So
there's a family dilution the further it goes down the track, right, with the generations.
I think that's the real challenge. I mean, obviously a typical family business or typical private business is started, usually by a couple or maybe a siblings or a father and son or mother and daughter team. So there's usually typically 1 or 2 people. And, they just set out to make a living for themselves and work hard to, on their product and service, and to find a market and to be successful. And then if they are successful and they have the right formula, then often others in the family come along for the ride, and either, in the early years or sometimes not until they're old enough to get involved. And then the longer you go on for, as you get to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, some of those founding principles, can get a bit diluted, and people start having, there are differences of direction, and people's values are different, and because the further you move away from that establishment foundational phase, there's potential for more of that. So, the family businesses that really get to fourth, fifth, sixth generation are amazing in the sense that they've had to really work on making sure there's something that glues us all together, even though we're often, off on different tangents and have all these different, different needs and issues. And there are so many strategies that are available to families, but they often trip themselves up because, there's only one enterprise and lots of family. And unless you can break it up into chunks and give this family this focus and the other family a different focus, sometimes when it's just a one enterprise, the people can trip themselves up.
Yeah. And what were your roles and responsibilities within Tobin Brothers, and then what was the precipitating factor in your decision to move on from Tobin Brothers?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I joined the business under a structured succession plan. So my dad and his cousins in the early 90s were thinking about the next generation of leaders and saying, well, we need to make sure that there's a number of new people coming through to take over from us, from that generation. And they all had children at various ages, all three and four cousins. Just to complete the story, one of the cousins of the four cousins sold his 1/4 share to the other three. So my dad was in partnership for most of his time with two of his cousins. The fourth line of the family sort of sold out in the 80s, but the other two cousins and dad all had kids, and they were different ages. So my dad was the middle age, and of the three cousins, and he had a younger cousin who was 15 years younger than him, and he's 15 years older than me. This other cousin, so they were going through this process of saying, well, who's going to follow on from the older cousins? And my dad was the MD. Who's going to follow on from us? Where's the talent coming from, etc. And my name got thrown in the ring in that conversation as, well, what's Martin doing? He's pretty switched on. I had worked in the company through my university holidays, so they all knew me, and I knew a lot of the key staff, and I'd done effectively work experience there, or university work for 5 or 6 years. So, everyone was aware of who I was. And so they sort of threw my name into the ring and said, and Dad came to me at one point and said, have you thought about joining the business? And I said, well, not really. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. And I'd studied law and I was working in a law firm, and I thought that was going to be my path. But basically they sowed a seed when I was in my early 20s to say, well, if you ever wanted to think about talking to us about working at the company, we'd be happy to have that conversation. So I did go back to them and say, yeah, that's of interest now. Sort of 18 months after the original chat, and I joined the company under a very structured plan. So it was, by the time I joined, it was well understood and planned that I would eventually take over from my dad as the MD. So even before I joined, that was like a predetermined pathway. And of course, it wasn't a fait accompli. It had to be subject to my performance and if things working well. But assuming all those things worked well, then yeah, that's what would happen, and that's what did happen. So after 5 years of working there, and having done an MBA, they put me through an MBA as part of my training. I took over from my dad, and for 12 years I was MD, and drove the success of the business for that through most of the 2000s, from about 1998 through to about 2010.
Wow!
And I can talk about how I left, but there might be a question or two in there about that whole journey into the business before I move into how I moved out of the business.
Yeah. So you. Did you at any time feel that you were kind of siloed into a particular role that wasn't necessarily befitting of your talents as a result of it being a family business and there being a need for someone to fill a certain role?
Well, yeah. I mean, really, from day one, I was sort of corralled into a particular role, but I was very much aware that was happening, and I felt that was probably the main role I would be interested in, which is the managing director's role. So it was a very focused leadership succession plan, and all of my cousins plenty of whom were already working in the business, and my sister, they were all aware of it. And, you know, it was important for me that they were all comfortable, that I was going to essentially be parachuted into the business and sort of just jump the queue and go straight into that key role. What the company did, which was a really intelligent thing, they developed a list of criteria for that role. And they said, our next managing director has to have these qualities, skills and attributes. And everyone was assessed against those criteria. So before that was formalised, me moving into that role, even before I even joined, I was assessed against these criteria, and so was everyone else. And the way it worked out was that in broad terms, I ticked more of the boxes than anyone else. And it was largely because they had put one of the criteria was tertiary education and some experience in another field. And most of my cousins and my sister had more or less gone straight into the business. So I just had that commercial edge, I suppose. Yeah, and they were all, they were all pretty comfortable with it. I must say, at the time, I was aware that, I was being fast-tracked, but it didn't, no one sort of seemed to get their nose out of joint too much. Everyone was pretty supportive, and, I didn't feel at any stage that that was creating any angst. It probably did, but it didn't sort of filter through to me.
Well, you do often describe family business being a bit like a duck. Something's always going on under the water. So I suppose it would be challenging to determine whether that disrupted harmony and a feeling of equity underneath you. Would that be true? Would that be fair?
Yeah. But I think they did it really well, in the sense that everyone did have a chance to comment and talk and raise. And my dad was a pretty strong personality within the business at the time. And, if anyone did have any grievances about the process, they possibly would have found it hard to stand up to him. But certainly by the time I joined, I knew them all. Like, I'd sort of worked in the business. So I had developed some credibility with the broader family. And I think, I don't think anyone realistically had the skills or sort of approach that I had brought to be the MD within the family. So, I suppose it was, by the time I joined and got going, I think most people were pretty comfortable.
How challenging do you think it is to run a business and keep harmony and a feeling of equity when the business is morphing into a second and third generation business? I mean, you were in charge there, and how much more difficult is that than, say, a first gen type family business arrangement? Yeah,
look, it is incredibly difficult. And I work, my business, Kin in the Game, which is based, it's a business that focuses purely on family business dynamics and creating more cohesion and succession planning and setting up governance structures. I wouldn't have a business if there wasn't dysfunction within a family business setting, and dysfunction probably in some cases a bit stronger word, but in a lot of cases it's very dysfunctional, in the sense that there's no structure, there's no game plan, the communication is poor, decision making is really ad hoc. So what tends to happen is you start a business around the kitchen table. There's this enterprise and gets going, and they find a market and everything goes along. But then you get much bigger and more complex, and those old structures and the way of doing things that often is usually the founder's sort of preference and reflects their style, it often doesn't cut it for the future. So then you get, second generation, third generation coming through, and they're looking for more clarity about their role and who's going to take over, and, who can join and who can't join, and how we're meant to behave around here. So all of those things often don't get written down or clarified, and you often get a real mess. And I often get brought in when there's mess and when there's lack of clarity, and the owner has lost a bit of control of the empire. It's sort of got it's almost like the business is outgrowing the structure. That
does make sense. Did you think that some of how much of Tobin Brothers and your learnings in that has actually translated into moving into your business now, Kin in the Game? Yeah,
well, a lot of it. I mean, I think my competitive edge in the market, there's a few people that do what I do. Most of them come from an accounting or legal, financial background, and they help with succession and family issues. But I think because I've lived the journey, I mean, I've been in for 20 years of my career. I worked with 15 members of my family, including for a very brief time, my great uncle, who was my grandfather's brother, and he died not long after I joined the business. But he was still very much a figure in our world. So I worked with 4 generations of my family, including my dad and my uncle and my sister and heaps of cousins. And I lived that journey. I lived that mess. I lived that challenge of getting cohesion and how do we make decisions and who's the boss and who's really running things behind the scenes, that sort of stuff. So when I then talk to a new client, a prospective new client about their challenges, I can sort of say to them that I've been in your shoes. I've lived that journey. I understand how difficult that can be. So I think that gives me some real insights that really helps me do what I do. And that is, so I will often, when I'm talking to my clients, say, well, yes, I had that same experience at Tobin Brothers. I like you, mate. I took over from my dad, like you are, and I can understand how difficult that is. So I think that empathy, when you're a consultant, an advisor, is really important and builds a lot of credibility and trust.
Oh, well, it's absolutely, without doubt, credibility that you've actually gone through it yourself. I mean, that's a very important component of it, isn't it? Yeah. So I'm interested in your thoughts on if your 4 children were to decide to start a business together, knowing what you know now.
Yeah.
What would you advise them, and would you be nervous for them? Would you tell them to run?
That's a good, really. I do think about that a bit, actually. And I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I really am of the view that a family business is not necessarily the optimum business model. I don't know what is. In fact, I don't think there is an optimum business model, but I would certainly be counselling anyone that's thinking of doing it, of warning them about the potential pitfalls, making sure that, not just when you put together a business plan, don't just factor in the commercial market issues or the product service issues, which, the things that most people think of, but make sure you think about your relationship with your family members as well. That's equally as important, if not more so, because people just tend to focus on how we're going to make this business successful, rather than how we're going to make this relationship successful. And that's that. So I've got, the 4 kids. My eldest son doesn't have, he's got slightly different DNA and approach and everything to the younger 3. And they might make a fist of it because there's a bit more commonality there. Having said that, if they're all too similar, sometimes, siblings, if they're too similar, will trip each other up because they're all sort of scrambling for the same sort of role or the same sort of idea. So it's good to have a bit of difference, but you don't want the difference to be Venus and Mars.
Yeah. So imagine just going into a business for the sake of the financial benefits of the business without the thought of what this might, what implications this might have down the line from the family dynamic point of view.
Absolutely.
Is probably the way most family businesses start, to be honest. I think they'd be very naive to the, changes in the family dynamics. You can only see that once you've gone through it to an extent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people just say, look, this would be, and I think they look at, there'd be almost like this rose-coloured glasses sort of, vision of what could be. We'll be in business together, and at least we trust each other, and it'll be great, and we'll make it successful, and we'll both work really hard. But the moment you have, challenges in that relationship, and people look at the other person and say, gee, he or she's not pulling their weight, or gee, they're not quite as switched on as I thought they were. How do you tell that? How do you say that? Convey that feedback to your brother or your wife or your son, daughter, cousin, whatever. And so you walk on eggshells for 10 years before you finally say to them, look, I've finally had to tell you this, really having trouble with you with this or that. And that person said, what, you've been sitting on this for 10 years and you've all this time you haven't trusted me or whatever, so, and it can just be really challenging. So it's just a dimension to a family business that you don't have in other business models.
Could we delve into some of the peculiarities of the family dynamic situations that can occur. I know as an example, it's reasonably abhorrent to me, but it's quite usual. Abhorrent is probably a strong word, but when you think about, the father-son relationship, and father-son can't actually speak about anything else other than the business, and that's the way they can connect it at any level. That's quite usual. It can be quite usual, and it's not unheard of in a business.
For sure, yeah, and so that's one of the typical, dynamics. And there's 5 or 6 that I could rattle off. There's the father and son, which is the old bull, young bull sort of dynamic. So that one. And I'll come back to that, but there's, often then the sibling rivalry sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
There's the parent-child one generally around, the parent that still treats the child like a child. And there's the cousins relationship, and there's also the partners, the life partners in business together. So, but yeah, the classic one is let's call it the father-son one, the old bull, young bull. So that's a really tricky one, because the son is desperately trying to prove to the dad that they're worthy and that they're going to be successful and capable of taking over, and the father is sort of desperately trying to ensure that his approach is being respected and followed, and that his legacy is not being sort of trivialized or with new ideas or new technology that may sort of undermine his sense of his contribution. So you do challenge and get quite challenging dynamics there typically.
Yeah, and the other one that's like of real interest to me is this, idea that we fundamentally try to love our kids all the same, and at the same time, there's the anointed one versus the one that's not quite there in terms of their capacity to take on the business. How disruptive is that especially when the one that is not the anointed one has beliefs that they can be that person?
Yeah. That's almost the most complex dynamic of all is the children coming through and the parents having to decide, who's in what role, how much they get paid. Is it equal to, are they all like, some family businesses, I can't choose amongst my kids. They're all, that one won't talk to me ever again. I know he or she's not as capable as the other one, but I'll treat them equally. So they'll be joint managing directors after we retire, and we'll pay them the same. Whereas one of them clearly not suited for that role, and then that creates issues between them. The one that's the stronger personality will probably dominate the other, and will probably resent that he's got this other sibling there that's sort of not quite cutting it, and the one that's sort of being dominated will resent the one that's sort of lording over them. So if parents sort of put all those things into the too hard basket and just let it flow, then they're actually doing themselves and the business and their children a disservice. So that's sort of where I come in. So I think that's where, it's those moments where they find it hard to make a good balanced decision is where they often will need to get some independent input so that they're not playing God with their own children, where they're not making those decisions without some input from someone who's independent, who doesn't have any of that history, or who can, independently assess the suitability of the siblings and work out which one should be in which role and how the future should be structured, etc. So yeah, that's sort of really where I come in, and I'll come in, and that issue of sibling rivalry is the elephant in the room that the family are really grappling with, and I sort of get straight stuck into sort of trying to sort it out.
So you talk about the parents, it being a disservice to the parents. I imagine part of the outcome as a result of this sort of situation where you just bury your head in the sand about it, it's quite challenging. So understandably, you bury your head in the sand about it. There's no capacity to if you're not attending to these matters, you're essentially going to continue to stay within the business and want to continue to work in the business as a leader, because you just can't see a solution.
Yeah.
Is that one of the outcomes?
Yeah, it is. It's all because it's all too hard, and I can't make this critical choice, or I can't sort of put in a structure that everyone's comfortable with on my own. then I'll stick it out a bit longer because I provide the discipline and the subconsciously, if I'm there, everything will be okay. But of course, all that they're doing is deferring the inevitable bun fight when they're not there anymore, particularly if they leave suddenly, i.e. through health or whatever. So the other thing they're not doing themselves a service with is, as you know more than anyone, is that a lot of family businesses, their family business is their main source of wealth. So if the performance diminishes because they haven't got a succession plan, if their market, their customers and their suppliers look at them and say, gee, what's going to happen when Freddie goes? The kids are a bit of a basket case, So a really good succession plan will be that issue of who's taking over and what the structure is going to be into the future will be a very public thing, and all the main stakeholders in that family's world should know at an early stage: the staff, the suppliers, the customers, the competitors, whoever needs to know, so that there's confidence in the baton change.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Martin, back in early 2011, you reinvented yourself to become a family business advisor, as we've talked about. Started with Outlaw Consulting, which you called it, but now you've aptly called it Kin in the Game. Tell us about the reasons for going down this path, and I suppose the name as well.
Sure. So I've talked about the leadership succession process where I took over from my dad as MD in 1998.
Yep.
And Dad went from being really engaged and fully committed to the business and running the business to passing the baton to me at the age of 60. So he was pretty young. And then for 2 or 3 years he stayed on as executive chairman and played an ongoing role and to mentor me and sort of support me through that in my early years as MD. And then in 2004, he got to the point where he decided to sell his ownership. So he'd lost hunger for the day-to-day challenges of the business, and he wasn't working in the business anymore. So he didn't want to sort of have an investment that he didn't have, control over, and that was the main source of his wealth and income. So he came along to my sister and I, who worked in the business, said, look, I'm wanting to get out and take my money off the table. He didn't have a particularly great working relationship or partnership with his cousins. They got along okay over the years, but they weren't completely aligned. So he said, I'm looking to sell, and if you want to buy my shares, you'll get first crack at it, but I can't really discount it much because I need that money for my own retirement. He was only in his early to mid 60s at that time, and mid 60s, and still had a lot of living to do. And so my wife and I talked about it, and my sister and her partner at the time talked about it, and both of us came back independently to say we're not in a position to buy your shares, Dad, because we just can't afford it, and we'd end up being minority shareholders with our cousins, and we're not sure whether that's a partnership that we want to embark on. So I basically said, well, no, I'm not going to buy any of your shares, and Dad was fine with that. He realised it wasn't going to be easy for me to do that. I was only sort of 35 or so and didn't really have a lot behind me. And so I just said, well, I'll just stay on as an employee, as the non-equity CEO, MD. And that's what happened. So from about 2004 to 2010, I was running the business without our family having any ownership. And that went okay overall. And, I broadly was supported by my cousins my cousins then bought Dad out instead. So I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So he then went to them and said, look, I want to get out. My kids aren't going to buy my shares, but you can if you want. And they said, yeah, we will. So they both of the other parts of the family purchased 50% of his 1/3. And so those two families now are 50 owners, and they're just completely different lines of our family that, through the generations. And I then worked, as MD for 6 years following Dad leaving or getting his equity out. And gradually over time, the dynamics shifted in the sense that our family sort of lost its influence, and I was getting second guessed more and more from the partners that in a sense I reported to, even though in a working sense they worked under me in an operational sense, but in an ownership sense I reported to them.
Yeah.
And we just sort of fell out of love gradually, and I probably found it difficult to be as engaged, committed as I once was, now that we didn't have any skin in the game.
Yeah.
And so in late 2010, we agreed to sort of review our commitment to each other, and there was a few things that happened that came to a head late that year, and then we both came back after the summer break in early 2011, and I said, well, I'm prepared to change a few things. What are you guys prepared to change? And they said, well, no, we don't think we have to change anything. And I said, well, maybe this isn't going to work. And they said, yeah, maybe it's not. And so we said, okay, well, let's separate. So they didn't really want that to happen. I didn't really want it to happen, but we're both probably pretty proud and pig-headed about it. And we separated. So I then left quite suddenly. It wasn't like a planned thing, and they didn't have a success. They didn't have a success for me in mind. And I then thought, shit, what am I going to do now? And I had 4 young kids all still at school, and mortgage and all that sort of stuff. So basically, what happened was I put out an email to a selection of contacts, people I'd met over the years and through the family business world, and because Tobin Brothers was an active member in FBA, Family Business Australia.
Yep.
And I was actually chairman of the Victorian chapter around that time, and sort of knew a lot of people in the movement, and sent out an email to about, I don't know, from memory, about 50 people saying, I'm leaving Tobin Brothers. Thanks for, supporting my journey, and I look forward to staying in touch with my next chapter. And I'm going to be looking for a new role as a CEO of a private business, which is sort of what I knew. And then on the back of that email, I got 3 different people contact me to say, oh, sorry to hear you're leaving Tobin Brothers, but look, while you're looking for a new job, can you help me with this project? I've got, my son has just joined me in the business and he's struggling, and, we haven't sorted out our succession. Can you come and help me with that? And the light bulb went off. The other 2 emails were similar. Can you come and help me? I've got a general manager who's not non-family, and I don't think he's going to, give me the drive I'm looking forward to enable me to retire. So all of a sudden I thought, that's what I'll do. That's perfect, because it combines all of my skills, my legal training, which helps me draft outcomes, draft all the documents that I do, my family business experience, and just my general commercial experience. So within about a week of leaving, I'd sort of started up a company name, and started holding, ringing people saying I'm doing this work now, and look, hopefully I can help with something, and just went from there. So and then that's it's over 10 years ago now, and the last 5 years I've had more work than I can handle. There's just so much demand for this support, and I sort of say to people that Tobin Brothers was like the entree. This is the main course. This is my real career now. This is probably what I was always designed to do. But be that the advisor, that consultant, that confidant on these issues, which is so important to people, because it's not only their business, but it's also their life. It's their family, it's their relationships.
Yeah, and I think it's of significant benefit. We're really privileged to have you on today, because over that 10 years, and certainly in the last 5, with the amount of businesses that you've been working with, you've got probably quite a lot to say around what you see as being the competitive advantages in running a family business over a non-family organisation. I know you talked about family businesses being very challenging, and you really have to be thinking about why you would do it. But there must be some competitive advantages. Could you give us a bit of an indication of what you think they are?
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I think they're all the things that people automatically think of when that sort of rose-coloured glass sort of impression of working with your family. But yeah, so those things do exist. So it seems like when you work with, when it's your own business, you tend to go the extra mile. You make sure that things get done properly, and you work those long hours, and you really drive great outcomes. And so when you're when you've got that skin in the game, that's what you tend to see happen. You set a great example for your employees and you really set something up properly. So you get that real advantage. And likewise, your staff tend to be more engaged. So I see this all the time, that when I work with a new client, just the level of engagement and commitment and passion that staff who work for a family that they respect, you know, when they see the family on the shop floor and that they're working alongside them and they know that that's the guy that takes home the money that this business makes. Whereas if you work for a government or a public company or whatever it might be, or a partnership of like a law firm, say that you know, when there's 50 partners and they're all getting, you know, 1/50th of, you can't necessarily identify with the recipient of your hard work, if you like.
Yep.
Whereas if it's a guy that you can see every day and you walk past him in the morning and he says g'day and you connect with him, there's just that stronger sense of engagement. And I see that all the time in family businesses, the pride that people say, I work for, you know, Johnny Smith and he's a pillar of our community and I'm really, you know, love working for him, that sort of thing. So you get that engagement. Other things like, you know, quicker decision making and more agile. You know, with a family business, you know, you just decide what you're going to do and you pull a couple of people together and say, yeah, let's do that. It makes sense. And whereas, you know, in some cases, a bigger company, it can be quite bureaucratic. You have to get approval from a committee and go through the board. And, you know, sometimes things just never get done. So that's another advantage. And probably the biggest one, I think, is this longer term planning horizon. So a family business tends to think about things 5, 10, 15 years down the track. You know, they say, well, let's get this going. Let's set this up so that the kids can eventually come into it and let's move it in a direction that it'll be exciting for them. And family businesses that do things because that's what they do. Like at Tobin Brothers, we often got approached by private equity groups to sell the business, but basically the family said, well, no, we're funeral directors. This is what we do. This is our grandparents started this thing and this is how we see ourselves. So it's not really it's not just a business. Sure, we're making a good living from it, but it's actually who we are and you can't just sell who you are. And so you take a long-term view of the future. And I think that means you make more often without even knowing it, you're often making strategic decisions 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years in advance, rather than say a public company that's always under pressure to get, you know, the share price up for the next reporting period or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think that might be the healthy aspect of having your ego or your family's kind of a culture and ego assigned to the business where there's a sense of pride in it. That's probably the healthy side of it. Probably the unhealthy side of it is also that, you know, not being able to detach and see yourself as a separate being and an entity to a business effectively.
Sure. There's no substitute, you know, the pride that people have in their name, particularly if the family's name is on the shingle, is on the brand, you know, the pride in that name. And it goes right through all the team that work there. You know, people love working for families. And the other advantage, you know, just to finish off that list of advantages, is that there's a lot of research to show that people will trust a family brand over a non-family brand.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, you know, think of all the corporate scandals and the institutional scandals we've had, and you know, over the years, and insurance companies and banks and churches, and you know, who have been embroiled in this sort of corporate greed and that sort of stuff. So family businesses stack up very strongly in terms of who people trust, because they see that it's, you know, whatever the brand is, you know, Brown Brothers wine or whatever, you know, there's a point of connection that people have more so than if it was a corporation. So I think that's another big advantage.
Yeah. I was wondering about some of the themes or key characteristics. You've seen enough family businesses now to determine, you know, what are the themes or key characteristics that highlight successful families over those that might have a few more challenges?
Yeah. So I think it's all about just getting organised. And I think the work that I do is all around professionalising a family business. So striking a balance between that passion and that ability to react quickly and that sort of lack of structure and lack of formality, getting a balance between that and then and the best of what the corporate world can offer us. So that if there's one good thing about the corporate world, you can say they're organised. That things are planned, there are meetings, there's structure, there's predictability, the roles are clearly defined. So I always talk to my clients around trying to find the sweet spot between having a family-first orientation versus a business-first orientation. And there is a sweet spot there. So if it was all about the family's needs and keeping everyone happy, and then you wouldn't get such great business outcomes, because, you'd have this happy family, but, they wouldn't be particularly competitive in the market. But if it was all about the business needs, there'd be a lot of family members left behind, because the business, we need to be really cutthroat here, and it doesn't matter what little Johnny thinks. We're just going to do this, and he's not in the key role yet, so we don't care. So there's a middle ground there where you can get the family engaged and bring out their passion, but also take advantage of being organised. And so my role is to find that right level of professionalisation for a family business, so that they don't lose that passion and that energy and that sort of that engagement, but they just get a bit more organised, because typically they don't have structured meetings. Things are made up on the run.
Yep.
Not much is written down.
Yep.
So I bring like an appropriate level of professionalisation. So there's regular meetings, clear role demarcation, a written succession plan so that everyone's clear. Usually a business plan so that the priorities for the business are sort of documented and thrashed out. So it's really just elevating their professionalisation so that it's no longer just this sort of this family is running really hard.
Yes.
They've got a purpose and a focus. So, and fortunately, that was my upbringing at Tobin Brothers. We were quite a well-organised family business. By the time I came along, Dad had already put a board in place, and we had a management team, and there were clearly defined roles, and decisions were made properly. It wasn't just the loudest voice, or there was a proper debate and there was a vote, and although we didn't vote that often. So that was my experience, and I saw the value in that. We had all the good family stuff going, because Tobin Brothers is a well-known brand and very respected in the field. So we had all that stuff working for us, but we also had some of those business disciplines working for us, and I think we overall found a pretty good sweet spot there.
So I'm interested in this sweet spot and this sort of equilibrium between, balancing between family and business, and life and business, and work-life integration, that sort of thing.
Yep.
I know that you've had your own recent sort of health scare of late. Yep. Did that put anything into perspective with yourself personally around balancing time between the family and the business and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it probably should have. My health scare was one that was a bit of a warning sign, and it hasn't manifested as it restricted me from doing anything yet. So, and hopefully never will. So in a sense, I know that it's there, but it's not. It hasn't hit me in the face fully yet. So I still running pretty hard with my life generally, but I'm more and more getting focused on what are my retirement goals, and when do I start slowing down a bit and starting to live the life that I really want to live. And unfortunately or fortunately, I really enjoy my work, so I tend to gravitate to it. I certainly don't consider it to be a chore or a hassle. So I relish getting in and writing that report that articulates the key points I want my clients to understand. So I enjoy it so much, so I tend to gravitate to it when I've got some spare time. But the things I love doing my time are usually, I'm pretty active. I do a lot of swimming and walking, and go to the gym when I can. Travel a bit. We've got a great little beach house in South Gippsland.
Yep. A place
called Waratah Bay that we get to as much as we can. And I'm fortunate that occasionally I'll do some interstate work, and I will invariably tack on a few days here and there to those trips. My wife will come up and we'll discover a new part of Australia. I think I'm with you. I, in principle, agree that we all should find that balance in our lives, but it's easier said than done sometimes.
Well, do you think that business owners typically have a kind of very binary view of success, or do you feel like the business owners that are the most financially successful have a more broad view of success? How do you see it? Is it all about work ethic, grinding yourself down, working for the dollar, or is it more nuanced than that? What do the best do you think?
Yeah, I think the best have a really diverse life, and you see, like Frank Costa died recently, and my dad actually wrote his biography. So one of the things that my dad did in his retirement phase was he writes people's history. He writes, and he's a really interested historian, and he does great research and everything. And so some years ago, he wrote Frank's biography. And if you look at Frank Costa as an example, like incredibly successful in a business sense, the Costa organisation is a $1 billion turnover organisation. It started with one fruit shop in Geelong with his parents and a couple of his brothers, and they're a $1 billion turnover business. So just the growth and the farms that they own and the produce that they move around. And then of course he's got eight daughters, so he's a very busy family life. He's incredibly engaged. He was incredibly engaged in the Geelong community in terms of on committees, and I think he was involved in local government for a while. He was president of the Geelong Footy Club. Just so many plates spinning, but he was amazing at all of those things. So I think he's a good example of when you're a leader, you can manage a lot of different things and make a real difference in all sorts of areas of your life, not just your business. But what is more typical, I find, is the business owner whose whole identity is wrapped up in the business, that's all they have time for and all that it's their primary focus, and they're not necessarily a good family person. They're not necessarily doing things in their life other than their work, and they wake up at 65, 70 and think, gee, I better start developing some new interests, but it's sort of too late, and so the work I do with my clients is for the incumbent generation. I will often work very hard to help them develop some new interests so that they've got something to retire to. It's one thing to retire from work, but you have to have something to go to. And the biggest reason I find that people don't retire at a point where they've still got some years left to sort of enjoy travel and, some activities and, a good quality life is that they haven't developed interests other than their job. And so that's more typical than the Frank Costa version, who's, I think it's more typical for people to become immersed in their job and their business becomes them. They're one and the same, and that's why they find succession so hard, because their identity is wrapped up in the business, and they find it hard to see themselves in other ways.
Bit of a cheeky title, but does the podcast name "It's Never About Money" resonate with you in any way?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think it does, and I'll come back to the kin and the gain thing as well. But yeah, I think that's great. A great message for someone like yourself who's a financial planner is that where your main offering is around advice about money, and of course the message is that it's what you do with that money, that it's what you do with that financial security that's important, not the money itself. And I think that's what I'm trying to say in my work too, is that what's the point of having this amazing enterprise if that succeeds at the expense of your family, if that succeeds at the expense of your relationships. So my work is actually more about driven by psychology and communication and relationships than it is about the commercial outcomes. And I'm often talking to the people about why are you behaving like this? What is driving this? Tell me more about the impact of that approach, on your relationships. It's so that's what people are screaming out for me when I interview all the stakeholders. It's my I know you guys do the same, but it's the first thing I do is to understand people's perspective, and people will invariably open up to someone independent. And the key theme with all of that is relationships. It's, what dad is doing to affect me and what mum's thinking and, my relationship with my sibling or my cousin. It's the core theme of human beings. We think and breathe and live in the context of our relationships with other people. And, so if you get that stuff right, the relationship stuff right, you usually get really good outcomes on the commercial side.
Yeah. So, Martin, what keeps you up at night and what's still to do for you? Hopefully you get good sleep.
Yeah. Actually, for the last few years, I haven't really worried about where the next thing is for me. I've got a point. I'm at a point in life where I am quite settled and content with where everything's sitting for me. My kids are all through school and on their way in life. My business is really quite predictable and solid, consistent now. Like I don't have any trouble securing new work, and I've got a real pattern, and it's a strong flow. My relationship with my wife is pretty good. We've had our moments over the years, but we're going pretty well. So I'm looking forward to more travel and more time to smell the roses. So yeah, I'm at a pretty good place in life. Apart from that little health scare I've had, which is an underlying sort of illness thing that I just have to manage. I'm really fit. I swim 3 or 4 times a week down in the bay and at Harold Holt Pool, and keep myself really fit. And that's been a great thing for me to take up over the last 5 years, where I feel that I'm quite good at something physical still, that I'm not a particularly strong cyclist or a particularly strong runner anymore, but I'm pretty not bad in the water. So life's pretty good at the moment. And I suppose I've put in a few hard yards to get there, but no, I'm pretty. If I could stay about this age and this place in life for the rest of my life, I'd be pretty happy.
Wouldn't we all? What does leading a family mean to you?
Leading a family, I think it's just doing things you're proud of, just doing things that are right, without being a dictator, without it's listening to people. I think leadership is largely about listening, and then setting a direction that reflects those conversations, that whether that's with your customers or your staff. If it's just determined by your own vision and your own perspective on things, then you're invariably going to miss out on some important insights from others. But yeah, leading a family business, yeah, it's being passionate, it's setting a great example. It's being proud of the product or the service that you have, and seeking excellence. It's having a commitment to being the best at something rather than an also-ran. And that takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Martin, this has been outstanding. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's, the original intention behind this podcast was to give back to the business owner community. And so I thought of you immediately when I thought about the themes of the podcast. And I'm sure everyone else would feel the same as I do about the value and the insights that you've provided. So thank you very much. But also I just wanted to end with, as I usually do, what spirit animal would you be and why? And I think you're a tiger supporter from memory.
No, kangaroos.
Oh, you're a kangaroo. So would you be a kangaroo? Well,
yeah, not at the moment.
I was actually preparing to say that you've done pretty well over the last few years, but I'll take that back.
Well, maybe I'll stick with the kangaroos as my animal, because we're in a rebuilding phase, we're in a reinvention phase, so
that's true.
The funny thing about North is that they, for a long time, just have been, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th in that no man's land. And I think they took the view that we can't afford to go right to the bottom because, we'll lose supporters and sponsors and all of that. But, they seem to have made a conscious decision now to sort of hit rock bottom and then build from the ground up. So it's a pretty courageous thing when you do that, but it's going to be a painful few years, I suspect.
Yeah, it's pretty bold, but 40,000 members, I think I saw the other day. So it's probably been pretty successful during a pretty difficult on-the-field time. But again, thanks so much, Martin, for coming on, and appreciate it. And obviously, anyone that's interested can find you on the web, Kin in the Game. Is your website? Is your business name? And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, just on that quickly, the kin in the game is all around, kin as in family, and the expression skin in the game, of course, there's no greater example of that than a family. They've got their brand on the shingle, they've got their family's name on the shingle, they've got their house mortgaged to the hilt. They work these crazy hours. So in those early years, I think a family business is a classic example of people who've got everything on the line. It's just great to work with family businesses who've gone from that point where some of my clients, they're very humble, very, reflective of their looking back, and they've got significant wealth. And they've developed it from a little office in their bungalow out the back of their house, 30 years ago, and then now, and so just to work with those families who've gone that journey and can look back and say, look at where we've come from. It's very humbling.
It's the beautiful Australian business story, isn't it? Thanks again, Martin.
Bye, Jack. Good man.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.